Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar this year. Thank you for joining us for the presentation of contemporary Ukrainian and Baltic art, edited by Svitlana Biedarieva and published by Uilleam Press. I'm Natalia Tronenko, a co-founder of British-Ukrainian Aid. Like Uilleam Press, who have been publishing this excellent series, we as a charity have been advocating for the Ukrainian voices to be heard, because we believe that listening to and hearing the opinions and voices of the Ukraine experts is essential for understanding Ukraine's past and present and the context of the current events. We are a grassroots charity registered in England and Wales. We offer humanitarian and medical aid to people who are suffering from the war in Ukraine, to the vulnerable groups who have physical, mental, or social disadvantages. And we are very grateful to you for attending today and for your donations. We rely solely on our own fundraising efforts. We run a number of projects and you can read about them on our website. All funds raised today will go towards our current project, reintegration through education. Its aim is to cover education costs for war veterans and help them to engage actively in Ukraine's political and social life. In the last 12 months, with your help, we have raised enough funds to sponsor the studying of the Ukrainian war veteran, Ihor Sholtis. He is doing a 2-year MA course in public management and administration at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. And another war veteran, Dmytro Yatsenko, whose studying was sponsored previously, successfully completed his course last year. If you'd like to support this cause further or any of our other projects, please donate using the Just Giving link that you will see in the chat, or by visiting our website. A few words on housekeeping. Please write your questions in Q&A. We'll be sharing the links about the recent publications of our discussants, about their books and exhibits, so you'll find them in the chat. If throughout the event you have any issues that you need to raise with us, write about them in the Q&A. And finally, if you lose the connection, you can rejoin the talk by clicking on the same link. Today we have a very special book to share with you. It has a clear, transparent title, but a very puzzling image, which you've seen on your event invitations. So I'm going to show it to you here. And we can see a delicate pale pink castle juxtaposed against the black and white photograph. And I hope that by the end of today's discussion, we'll be able to unravel the mystery of this image. This volume on art history is the first of its kind. It's the first comparative research to explore artistic transformations in post-colonial Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania after the fall of the Iron Curtain. And it must be said that the collaborative effort by art historians and curators from these 4 countries is both symbolic and significant, as indeed is the current support which Ukraine receives from the Baltics. Thank you, Estonia. Thank you, Latvia. Thank you, Lithuania. I have the delight to introduce our discussants. Dr. Svitlana Biedarieva, welcome Svitlana, the editor and the driving force behind this volume. Svitlana is an art historian, artist, and curator with an interest in Eastern European and Latin American art. She has taught art history and global history at a number of universities worldwide, as well as the Courtauld Institute of Art. She published widely in Space and Culture, Art Margins Online, and Revue Critique d'Art. One of her recent publications is a book, Art at the Frontline, Ukrainian Art. Our next panel discussion participant is Dr. Margaret Tali. Welcome, Margaret. Margaret is an art historian, theorist, and curator. And currently she's doing her postgraduate research at the Estonian Academy of Arts. She is the author of Absence and Difficult Knowledge in Contemporary Art Museums, published by Routledge. Her other publications, in collaboration with other academics, include the anthology Archives and Disobedience on Visual Culture in Eastern Europe, as well as the special issue in Baltic Worlds, Confronting Muted Memories, Reading Silences, Entangling Histories. As a curator, Dr. Tali has also initiated with Ieva Astahovska the collaborative exchange, research, and exhibition project, Communicating Difficult Pasts. Our next participant is Andrij Bojarov. Welcome, Andrij. Andrij is a Lviv-born Ukrainian-Estonian artist. He worked in Ukraine and Finland and collaborated with Warsaw Center for Contemporary Art in Poland and the Cultural Foundation in Estonia. In his work, Andrij addresses the impermanent essence of history through the lens of a photographer. He expands his visual archive with the images of other photographers and applies so-called artistic appropriation. By placing these images within a contemporary context, he creates an alternative story and new meaningful connections between the past and the present. Welcome, Andrij. And next is Dr. Uilleam Blecker. Uilleam is a lecturer in comparative Russian and East European culture at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, University College London. He is co-author of Remembering Katyn and co-editor of Memory and Theory in Eastern Europe. He has written for the Times Literary Supplement, Open Democracy Russia, and Words Without Borders. He has published fiction in the Edinburgh Review and Stand and has translated the work of several contemporary Ukrainian authors. And last but not least, Professor Andreas Umland. Welcome, Andreas. We're very happy to see you again, who will be moderating today's event. He's a senior expert at the Ukrainian Institute for the Future in Kyiv and a research fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs in Stockholm. He's also a general editor of the Soviet and post-Soviet Politics and Society book series, and of course, an inspiration behind the Ukrainian Voices book series, in which today's excellent volume has been published. Andreas, thank you very much for moderating. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. I will just say a few words on the book series in which Svitlana's and the other authors' book has appeared, which Natalia already introduced. It's called Ukrainian Voices, exists since 2019. So for 26 volumes have been published in this book series, published by Ibidem Verlag in Stuttgart, but also distributed by Columbia University Press in New York. Svitlana's volume is volume number 14 in this series. It is already on sale. It can be ordered both via Ibidem Press and Columbia University Press. It can be also ordered via a multitude of bookshops, electronic bookshops. And I'm particularly happy that Svitlana's volume, I'm just mentioning her here as the editor of the book, has come out in this book series because it opens a new chapter in the book series, something that has been missing, a focus on art that makes, of course, this volume doubly, I would say, appropriate for the series, because some of the authors of the book are Ukrainians and therefore Ukrainian voices, but they also write about Ukrainian voices, and art is, of course, just one form of voice. So I'm very happy to have that in the volume. I'm also very glad that we have now in this volume a comparative perspective that sort of contextualizes also the Ukrainian experience against the background of the Baltic experience. It's also an academic book. It's some of the other books in the book series were also academic studies. Not all of the books in this book series are narrowly speaking academic studies, but this clearly is one and is written by academics. I'm also very happy that we have here presenters that will sort of expand upon this this project and will present here additional accounts. So I'm very happy about this project that really sort of encompasses a whole number of people. Not just it's not just Svitlana, but she has brought together here contributors, artists, and a whole range of people who have to say something interesting. With that, I will give over to Svitlana to introduce the volume, perhaps also introduce herself a little bit more if you want, and then we will go on as with the schedule with the other speakers. Thanks. Please, Svitlana, you're next.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Thank you so much to Ibidem Press and to Ukrainian Voices series and Andreas personally for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to collaborate on this book and this volume and to create really something new for some kind of new interpretation of Ukrainian studies in art through comparative analysis. And I'm really delighted today to present this book, Contemporary Ukrainian and Baltic Art, Political and Social Perspectives, 1991-2021. So the book covers the last 3 decades of art production in Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. I think is a great and really meaningful collaboration that we created with prominent Ukrainian and Baltic art historians and curators in order to present a book that would speak about conceptual, historical, and political relations between Baltic countries and Ukraine, and also how the cultures of these 3 countries and Ukraine, they intersect and they enter into the dialogue. The point of comparison of this book is an important point, in my opinion, that is currently very under-researched because there haven't been any kind of really detailed historical analysis of these territories that were the former Soviet West, and how actually all these topics pertinent to a post-Soviet space, but also the identities that emerged in the last 30 years, how they interact and how these identities actually persist in exchange. And also the aim of this book is, of course, to speak about possible artistic exchange between these countries. The volume speaks about post-colonial perspectives, which is, of course, important for understanding actually the kind of the unity and the dialogue between the countries in question, but also it aims to kind of to deviate from the post-colonial paradigm, from this center-periphery opposition, and to speak about identities that developed through the notions of memory, through the notions of trauma, through the notions of some kind of traumatic and conflictive history, undoubtedly, but that they emerged already in the contemporaneity and in the particular locations. And I think this is one of the important contributions of the book. So the wonderful texts of the colleagues who are key specialists in their countries, they address such topics as memory, trauma, relation to totalitarian regimes, and also they provide a wider perspective, not as a binary opposition, because this was the main point of this book, and not to create this comparative perspective between Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Latvian, and Estonian art, but to create rather a complex narrative that could help to the reader or to the fellow researchers to see the possible connections, tangible and intangible connections between the case studies that the authors contributing to this volume actually address. So in this way, the main aim is not to to make this a very strict oral comparison. The main aim is to open a dialogue and the discussion of the possibilities of common past, or of the topics of belonging and non-belonging, or of the ways how methodologically, even from the academic point of view, we can interpret these relations and these entanglements. So two important aims that as an editor I wanted to present in this book. One was methodological aim. As an art historian, I'm very interested in comparative analysis and comparative history of art. Unfortunately, for the time being, this discipline, this area is not virtually present. Not just speaking about art in Eastern Europe, but speaking about global art history. There are very few books that speak about comparative perspective in art history. In difference, for example, to comparative literature, to comparative politics, whereas there is many more research texts present. So this was some kind of statement to present one of the contributions to this field. Another is to place Ukrainian studies and Ukrainian art history into the niche of art history globally, to find its place, not only as some kind of post-Soviet art, not only from this point of view of center-periphery relations, not from the point of view as some kind of conflict and trauma related art, but as art per se that deserves actually to be integrated into the international art history and to find its decent place there. And similar, of course, we can speak about Baltic art. So I'm very thankful to the colleagues for accepting this invitation, and to all the authors who kindly agreed to write for this book. And I think the collaboration was just wonderful. And I would like just to highlight some of the contributions of the texts of participants of this volume, kind of to make a short overview and kind of to give an impression what this book is about. Okay, so the text by Ieva Astahovska focused on Latvian transformation from a post-nationally driven socialism to a transnational capitalist society in Latvia and the Baltics, and how actually these transformations from socialism to capitalism were expressed in artistic practices over the last 30 years. Also, she considers broader post-colonial entanglements in the region, and how artistic practices were informed by these double identities that they experienced and that they challenged throughout the last 30 years. Kateryna Botanova presents an analytical overview of the main art events in Ukraine of of since 1931 or 1991, sorry. And she explores the agency of an artist through a notion that she introduces artist as a virus. This is a very interesting idea that an artist infects the cultural and political system of every country, and makes this change, both institutional change and some kind of individual change from inside of the system. So basically, she shows how art works as some kind of subversive element, but at the same time, this art becomes a constructive element. If we speak about the society of Ukraine in the last 30 years. Olena Martynyuk examines apocalyptic visions of the early 90s and the way how the collapse of the Soviet system triggered expressions of hope and fear in art of the 1990s. And how early post-Soviet culture and the art were formed by this expectation of the collapse and the hope that collapse doesn't occur. Lina Michelkevičė and Vytautas Michelkevičius, in their wonderful text about Lithuanian art, speak about preservations of memory and interpret the ways Lithuanian art was represented through collecting, and how this process was challenged by artists, and how this process was incorporated in different ways by art institutions. So they speak about memory, archive, and the ways of preservation of this memory in art through private and public initiatives, and some kind of alternative initiatives as well. Margaret Tali considers the themes of memory and trauma in Baltic and Estonian art with an important focus on identity debates through history. And I think that Margaret will talk about her text and will present in more detail. And we are looking forward to hearing about this text. Jessica Zychowicz, in her text, looks at the questions of gender identity and feminism in contemporary Ukraine, and how Ukrainian art actually combines these notions of gender with the notion of political criticism, and how political is intertwined with gender identity in Ukrainian art. And finally, my text speaks about the documentary turn in Ukrainian art after 2014, and the ongoing intention of the artist to document the conflictive and uneasy reality surrounding the topic of Russian war in Ukraine. And especially the ways how they documented the displacement that many artists experienced after 2014. And how they, through this documentation, they keep the link with the territories that they needed to live as a result of this displacement. And artists appear as direct witnesses of the turbulent situation. And this is precisely what is important of Ukrainian art nowadays, is that it is an art that works directly with the events that take place at the moment, and they address critically these events. And artists, as they understand the responsibility of record for the history, of creating this history. And other element of this documentary turn is the archival turn that occurs simultaneously in Ukraine. There is an increased interest in artistic work with archives who explore and critically reinterpret the histories that formed our contemporaneity. So one turn of the documentation, the necessity of documentation, brings also the necessity of archival research. And this is a very particular situation of Ukrainian art after 2014. the work, this particular work is made by Andrij and Lina, Ukrainian artists currently living in Poland because they needed to flee from Donbass in 2014. And the work is called Fairy Castles of Donetsk. So basically, the artists that took their archival photography from the archives of Donetsk, and they represent peaceful, quiet, almost empty streets of Donetsk of the Soviet times, of 1950s maybe, and they combined it with this kind of childlike, utopian constructed image of castles in different variations. And these castles mean to represent the nostalgic, the utopian visions of Donetsk by those people who needed to flee it after the war started. And this project is actually not a project of collages. It's accompanied with interviews with different people who present their memories, kind of utopian memories of their childhood, for example, in Donetsk. And they painted as a city where they had happy moments, and the city where they had some kind of interesting events of their lives, but this is not now not more than a memory. So this is one of the examples of archival work. And archival work which works with ideas of belonging, emotional connection, and affection. This book was written in the situation when there was a relatively relieved situation with the Russian tension in the border of Ukraine, and nevertheless, it incorporates all these topics, and nevertheless, we shouldn't forget that the war already continues for 80 years. So the current tensions are nothing new, because we all live in this situation for quite a while. And now with the escalation of these tensions, it's very important to discuss Ukrainian belonging to European cultural space, to this precise border of Eastern Europe. And it is very important, therefore, to have these projects that speak about conceptual, but also some links that can be of not only political, but the links of heritage, for example, with such countries as the countries of the Baltics and the neighboring countries of Eastern Europe. And well, just one of the last remarks is that yes, I would like also to remark that this book in its total proposes a challenge to this very post-colonial paradigm, because we don't speak about post-coloniality in the book. We speak about a wider spectrum of notions and a complexity of notions that cannot be described in this way. And the methodology to speak about these notions is yet to be elaborated, because I think that kind of the comparative analysis precisely doesn't need to rely on this power relations, like horizontal and vertical power relations. It needs to search for something else that can produce an impact on research of art production inside each particular country, and as an independent phenomenon. Okay, I hope that this book will be a contribution to the some kind of regulation of the situation with this precise anxiety around the situation in Ukraine now, and hopefully art can contribute to this. And also this book, of course, is an expression of solidarity and collaboration between different cultures and between different countries and their artists. Thank you.
Thank you, Svitlana. I would now suggest perhaps in my schedule, Margaret, you were not yet mentioned, but I guess you should be coming next, yeah? Margaret? Tali? Yeah, unmute yourself. Mm-hmm. Please present your chapter or whatever you want to present.
So thank you very much. I'm happy to be part of this this event, and I look forward also to the discussion. I haven't researched Ukrainian art. My chapter focuses on the Baltic art context, but I've been collaborating with Ukrainian artists, and I'm very happy about such connections and such links. So my chapter in this book evolves from a broader research project that I've been doing over the past 2 years, which looked into the Baltic artists' ways of investigating the histories of the Second World War and also its aftermath in this Baltic region, because I realized that although these historical narratives are not that nuanced and quite that complex, actually artists have started to engage with these complexities and bringing them much more richly to the fore. So this is where the project evolved from, and I was looking at visual art and documentary film, and this chapter specifically focuses on examples of visual art, and most of them are from the past 10 years. Examples that are included. And because I'm also an art historian, I like to work with artworks more closely. Then I also bring 2 examples in this discussion today. But so the first example I'd like to share with you is the work of Andrij, who is a Lithuanian artist based in London, and her work deals with Soviet penal architecture. It's titled in brackets 1944 to 1991, and I'm going to see if it works out to show you 2 images. Is it visible? Yeah. So these are buildings which are sites of former NKVD, MVD, KGB, and so forth in various Lithuanian towns and villages. Biggest concentration of them being around Vilnius and Kaunas region. And it's based on the list, which wasn't compiled by the artist herself, but when she came across, she started visiting these sites, documenting them, sometimes having conversations with people around the sites. And of course, something which is really striking is that while these buildings have such a dark history of repression and torture, they are completely they are buildings that are often inhabited. Some of them are abandoned. Some are used as sheds. But it's a really interesting testimony of this arbitrariness of terror and how masterfully this Soviet power enacted against people. But so this on the one hand, and on the other hand, also this powerful signs of change and resilience, transformation. So something which was also really striking when interviewing the artist, so she told me that there was little interest locally in these buildings, which is not surprising, considering the operations of trauma and the kind of how to say this eagerness of people to move on and to forget and focus on future, which is also human. So her as an outsider at this point, she's been living in London for more than 15 years. It gives a kind of different investedness to deal with the topic that she's able to look at as if with foreign eyes. So she also saw the kind of beauty in these kinds of transformations, which I find really, which was eye-opening for me as well. Because these buildings, this is the next example. These buildings, and I have two photos here, but there are over 300 of them. She usually exhibits them together with her photographic documentation, and then there are these wooden structures that the carpenter has made on her request. They're about this height, visually it's a very, very strong image that this creates a strong impression. And in my chapter, I looked at this work as an example of dealing with the sites of non-memory in the Baltic context, and I think these houses really speak of and their arbitrariness. Let's say they speak of the Eastern European context at large. The other example that I use and I'd like to share is the example of Maria Kapayeva's work, which I discuss as an example of minority identities being manifested by artists in new and more prominent ways, because in the 90s there wasn't such self-positionings of artists being Estonian Russian or Latvian Jewish, which are my main examples, and these are developments that have happened over the last 7-8 years, that artists claim these identities and also then draw connections with histories, and often also Second World War has been the main point of reference. And I don't discuss this in this chapter, but it's also it has interesting links to the internationalization of art fields and more people transnationally coming to exhibitions to show their work in in this context, and artists internationally dealing with their Baltic origin abroad. So this is visible in documentary film, but it's also visible in visual art. And I mean, Indrė has moved to London with her family in the 90s, but of course she's also now this artist, Lithuanian artist living abroad, and there are many others. So the other example is the book, and I show a cover here. The book looks like this, by Maria Kapayeva, which is titled "A Dream is Wonderful, Yet Unclear." The book was published 2020, and it deals with this largely forgotten histories of women who worked for the Krenholm textile mill in the border city between Estonia and Russia, in Narva. And Kapayeva has collaborated with a community of women working, who used to work for that factory, because in 2009 it was closed over a longer period of time. And the book is also dedicated to her mother, who used to work as a designer, Natalia Kapayeva, in that factory. So while dealing with questions of identity in her work more broadly, this book in particular connects it tightly with questions of gender, ethnicity, class, and while so Narva is a city which is largely inhabited by Russian-speaking people who used to come from the whole of Soviet Union. So Russian-speaking is a kind of a comfortable way of addressing this cultural plurality, to which we don't yet have language in which to describe and accurately discuss this plurality, I would say. And Krenholm factory in particular, people in Estonia have grown up with wearing the textiles and being surrounded by these textiles in the households decades, and at the same time extremely little is known about it because of this particular position of Narva in the local contexts, and so in a way, based on her archival research into and oral history of these many of these women who used to work for the factory, she kind of adds names and faces to this very harsh work and health damaging work for the women. Many of them did it in night shifts for in the 90s, also for modest salaries, and there was this transition also of being celebrated that she discusses during the Soviet era, and finding themselves in a very new context in the 90s, where the factory changed hands and ownerships various times, and eventually which led to the bankruptcy, so that the women lost their jobs and faced very, very harsh realities, also being doubly discriminated in the local context for their Russian identity and for their gender. So yeah, she opens this and visualizes what often is located in the margins of the Estonian society, and places it in the heart of her research and her investigations. And I'll show the images that I've also brought in the book, in the article. So here you see some archival scenes from which these women have been moved, some kind of haunting series in reference to their invisibility. And at the same time, she also comes to discuss then the women, and she reads their diaries, shows their dreams, and shows them as individuals, flesh and with daily lives, doing the demanding work to replace their social invisibility.
Okay, Margaret, we have two more presenters, so I want to maybe if you could wrap up what you have.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me about time. Yeah, basically this is what I wanted to bring to the fore, and there's another part of the book that in the chapter that I talk about complicities and how they operate, and in a way what is important is that these kinds of nuances can be brought to the fore through personal stories. And I think this is what the role and contribution of art can be, also to the history writing at large, not only to art historical narratives that Svitlana was mentioning earlier. I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Then maybe we could also get out of this picture. Yeah, okay. And on my list next comes Andrij Bojarov. Are you? Yeah. I hope everybody agrees. And please, Andrij.
Thank you, Andreas, and thank you for inviting me. I will tell shortly about my project, which connects me straight to Tallinn from Lviv. But first, I want to add something to what Natalia told about me, or presenting me. In last 10 years, because it's very much explained my artistic activity as well. Because in last 10 years, I was active as researcher and curator as well. And I realized most of my project in point for our discussion too. That's the country in between Ukraine and Baltics, and it's a Baltic country as well. That's one of the project on Deborah Fogel, which I made with my two Polish co-curators, my two friends. Another project on Lviv photography. Again, it was made in Poland. It's based on my artistic which I was cooperating in Muzeum Sztuki in Łódź as well. Project which is very important for Ukraine, the avant-garde and the state, but totally unknown in Ukraine. I have to add this information just because it will be more easy to explain how I'm working as an artist as well. And just which is connected us. I'm always driving from Lviv to Tallinn via Poland before Lithuania. Pitifully, Belarus is out of the picture now. So let me share the screen and tell about the project. I wanna tell you the project which Svitlana is mentioning in her text on documentary Turn in Ukrainian Art. So I'm trying to share the screen now.
Yeah, so we will get back to Andrij once he is online again, but perhaps let's see how it goes. Go ahead, please, William.
Okay, so thank you so much to Svitlana for the invitation to participate in this event, and thank you for the wonderful book, and congratulations, and also to Andreas for the series as well, which is one of the best things that's happened in Ukrainian studies in a long time. The book, I think, will be an absolutely indispensable resource for Ukrainian studies for all scholars and students of Ukraine, but also of the Baltic countries. But I think also, you know, it's an important book in the wider context of European art. Over the last few decades, I was really impressed by the range of material that's analysed in these chapters. You know, it's not a super long book, but there's so much packed into each of the chapters. So it's quite kind of encyclopedic. And in that sense, it's really on that level of just the material and the descriptive dimension is extremely valuable. But also at the same time, there's a very sophisticated and useful analysis, which is going into all kinds of areas like post-colonial studies and memory studies and gender studies, and so on. And it's really, really refreshing to see that. In the context of Ukrainian studies, again, this is a very unique book, I think. I don't think there are any other sort of academic analysis of this type of material, so it's a real landmark, and it's, you know, when I compare it to the situation with, for example, the study of literature in Ukrainian studies, there's much more published and much more attention dedicated to literature than there is to art. So it's really wonderful to see this. I was really impressed by the framing of the volume in the introduction, which I think it's a really useful text. For anyone trying to understand Ukrainian art or East European art. I was really refreshed by the way that it kind of tries to move away from the post-Soviet label, the kind of temporal and geographical limits of that. The way it shows that, you know, the art in these countries can't just be reduced to some kind of, you know, post-Sovietness or searching for identity or trying to return to Europe and these kind of ideas. We see the way that these artists are really engaging with the local narratives, the local pasts, the local context in this very inventive and often very ironic ways, but also in the way that they engage with, you know, all the things which Western European artists would also engage in, all the big themes, and this really immediately shatters any kind of stereotypes that we might have about any kind of insularity in the art cultures. And in many ways, you know, this is really a project that's about European art more broadly. It's a project which this book is a book we can read to understand broader cultural, social, political processes. It provides this very interesting view from the, you know, quote unquote periphery of Europe. And I think, you know, it's really represent this move away of the idea of using Western artistic or cultural models to understand Eastern Europe or help the artists there to work or understand themselves. And it's also great, what I really enjoyed in the chapters was to see so many references to theorists from the region itself. Yeah? So not just this kind of typical way of using the Western theorists to talk about the Eastern European context, but actually seeing what kind of theorization has been produced inside these countries as well and inside the region. And I think the volume is also it's a really powerful argument for the study of the art of these countries, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, in broader contexts, in English-speaking academia, by Western, broader international global audiences. It's an argument for the inclusion of these artists in, in exhibitions, for coverage in the media, for coverage in syllabuses that focus not just on these countries or East European art, but also on European art more generally, or feminist art or post-colonial art. And I would say, it's also an argument for making this art more accessible. One of the major problems I think we have with art from Ukraine in particular, I know less about the Baltic context, is that it's very difficult to access good quality reproductions. It's very difficult to, the exhibitions are very rare. So this volume, I think, really makes a strong argument for improvements in this area, for more accessible English language publications, and for more efforts to be made to bring this art to wider publics. So if I work with literature, and we complain about the quantity and quality of translations very often, but it's much easier to find literary texts from the 80s and 90s than it is to have access to these artworks. I was really impressed also in the volume by the challenging subject matter that's been broached by all these artists, but also by the very interesting and innovative artistic approaches. So it's challenging in what it's talking about, but it's challenging in the way that it's talking about it. So whether that was the innovations in Ukrainian painting in the late 80s, which Olena Martynyuk described, which doesn't fit into existing official, unofficial Eastern, Western paradigms really. Various kind of performances and happenings in Baltic art that are described in several of the chapters. I was particularly interested in the way that so many of these artists are dealing with problems of trauma, dealing with problems of dealing with the past, with difficult memories. One of the and this goes across both the Baltic countries and the Ukrainian context. So Ieva Astahovska's chapter was very interesting about that. Really interesting as well, Svitlana's chapter on documentary, and the way that this documentary approach seems to be more appropriate to a lot of the problems facing Ukraine today. So all of these things, extremely interesting, extremely innovative, and bringing all kinds of new ideas into the field. I was also really interested in the amount of attention that was paid in the volume to institutions, structures, groups, milieu. Who are the actors? What are the groups? What are the structures involved? I think that's also extremely useful, and that came through very much in Kateryna Botanova's and Jessica Zychowicz's chapters. And in that sense, that there's a real kind of art historical value to these chapters, as well as value for theorists of art and culture. There are lots and lots of questions that the volume raised, but I will maybe just pose 2 questions, and then if people want to answer them, wonderful. If you don't want to answer them, if you want to go to the questions from the audience, that's absolutely fine. The first was about memory, so it's something that I work on myself. The way that explorations of memory of World War II, the Holocaust, Stalinism, all of these kind of things are represented and sort of being worked through. But all of the times I had this feeling like the artist's practice is really running against the prevailing trends in memory politics, kind of going in the opposite direction, to a more critical, more deliberately challenging, maybe provocative direction, with a much more kind of pluralistic sensibility. Whereas the memory politics is often focused on, and I think there are definitely similarities in some of the Baltic states and in Ukraine, in recent years on kind of taking control of the narrative of the past, reshaping it, even censoring the past in various ways, whether that's through reshaping urban landscapes or through various kinds of legislation. Processes which are arguably necessary on the one hand, but also problematic in lots of different ways. So my question would be, do you see the work of these artists as a kind of reaction to political trends? And if so, what, is there a possibility that this art practice can in some ways influence political trends? Or is this more a kind of conversation for a niche audience? Can it have an impact on the actual broader social conversations? And just finally, the second question, which was something which actually Margaret touched on in her presentation, was that, and which wasn't really raised too much in the chapters, so I was kind of interested to hear what you thought about it, was the way that this is, what you're describing is happening alongside processes of sort of re-establishing of national canons, after the end of the Soviet period, which distorted or played down the national tradition. Art, because it's a visual medium, it's not tied to language in the same way as literature or theatre or even cinema, is harder to tie down to a specific national culture and a specific national context, especially if the artist's subject matter is not overtly national. And very often, artists are very mobile, they're collaborative, they exist in these kind of cosmopolitan networks, and that can be difficult to fit into these national paradigms. So I wonder, to what extent do you think it's important to follow this route of making visible previously invisible, erased national processes, which undoubtedly exist? Or on the other hand, is there a danger in doing this of kind of retrospectively imposing a certain sort of national lens on a cultural process, let's say, in the late Soviet period, for example, which was more complicated than this, and which the national lens cannot really describe accurately? So those are my two questions to leave you with. I'll keep my comments short and cut them down. I've cut them down a little bit because I think we're running out of time, but that's all I've got to say. So hopefully the slides are going to be working.
Thanks, Uilleam. I hope, Svitlana, you wrote, and Margaret, you've wrote down the questions, because we now go back to Andrij and let him finish his presentation. Hopefully now the technology will...
Let me begin then before the finish. So I'm very sorry, but it's something out of my control. So I reload now both Wi-Fi and computer. So I don't know if I was interrupted before. I said I've took intensive research and curatorial work as well on Lviv avant-garde and modernism, and neo-avant-garde as well in my native city in recent years, which I hope will somehow explain my artistic work as well. So I'm trying to share my screen finally.
Now it works.
Super. So I want to tell shortly, because limit of time, of one of my project with Svitlana is mentioning in her text. The title is somehow subversive, because it's the only project I'm repeating in different places. It's not site-specific by definition, by art definition. I think even the Estonian title, the specificity of the place, is more relevant here. And I think it's based on the concept which describing some universal process, which is very specific in each case, but I will come back to it again. So the story begins back in 1996, when I was walking with my Japanese friend, photographer, at Kentmani Street in downtown Tallinn. You can see how the street looks now on this color picture down, and how this place was looking back in 96 still. Those classical wooden houses at Kentmany Street. And we're walking on the other side of the street and suddenly saw just a mountain of the things was thrown out of one of these houses. So this house was totally empty before, I don't know, renovation or demolition, because the house, which is completed on the color pictures, was finished around 2011, I think. I love those kind of things, this archaeology. So I went straight through the street, and from this mountain of stuff, I took the box, the small box, which I was open. It was full of negatives. I was shocked. So first, it was a blue box, signed as a seat. Semnet was the sign, and the first title of this project was from the blue box. The color was like, I've choose this background for this picture. The color of this box was like this. So sincerely, I was shocked. It was 1.5 years I was inactive as an artist. And when I opened it, I was really shocked, and I was fully shocked when I started to print it out. So it was about 300 negatives. It's repackaged by me on this picture. 300 negatives. It was pictures. We was taking 3 per 4 centimeters, just celluloid negatives, made evidently by amateur photographer. It was nature, holidays. Some of those pictures was very interesting, as the one of the left. The pictures was mostly from the time of First Estonian Republic, from the end of the 20s and the 30s, and some even of early Soviet times. I believe it's from the 40s, from late 40s. You can see this picture. Later on, I've started to recognize the guy who made it, the author. He's in the head on the right in this car. It's a picture still from the end of the 20s, I think. And then I saw how he was making selfies at that time for himself. You can see the cord in his hand on this picture. So it was evidently the selfies. So this is the guy, the author, I believe. That's him. Have you got a full screen now? Yes, of my pictures. So his pictures was as well as early as the end of the 20s till the Soviet time. Now it's Kentmany Street, if you didn't see it.
Yes.
Sorry, I thought all the time you can see those pictures. So this blue box, I mean the color of this box and the first name of this project. Those negatives, I've repackaged. You can see it now, right? You can see it.
Yes.
So those pictures, what I found on those negatives, generally normal amateurish photography, but some pictures was interesting, from the Estonian times, as I said, till the Soviet times, but mostly from the 30s of First Estonian Republic. Then I recognized the guy. He's on the right on this picture. This his selfies he made. You can see the cord in his hand, this rope. He making selfies for himself. So that's him. That's evidently the selfies as well. He was making selfies. He is quite young on the upper picture on the right, and he's on the Soviet times already in the 40s. His travels, I can recognize Warsaw on the upper picture, and Riga on the picture on the right down. But what's striking me really, what I affected for, are the pictures of his kids, of his 2 sons. I believe it's his 2 sons. Those pictures was really impressive. So, and some are really unbelievable, I can tell it. So it was really out of those 300 negatives, about 15 was something unbelievable, like those 2. It's just weird, even frightening. So, and has some, I can call it internal touch. So I've choose some of those. I believe it's those 2 sons, but I never can recognize who is who on those pictures. So I've choose about 15 of this, and quite recently I have association with Jungian concept of individuation. So I've choose it. I was inspired by this, like to show this project, to organize this project, what I saw on these negatives. So for me, mostly it was because I can't recognize who is who on those pictures. I never was certain who is who on these pictures from those two boys. Another thing, I was clearly can see the process of growing of the boy. So I've choose this concept just to organize this project for myself. At the time, I was absorbed with Jungian ideas as well. At some point, but intuitively, but as well because I can see what side of the negative is proper, I was starting to print them like mirror turn. So an effect was very interesting, as I think it's happened. So I've printed this 50 per 60 centimeters. This still was silver prints at that time. So I've printed it like this. And just recently, when preparing this presentation, I found this notion on the wiki on individuation, not on the Jungian ideas, that other psychoanalytic theory describe it as a stage individuation, where an individual transcends group attachment and artistic self-absorption. So somehow I've just illustrated this process of this self-absorption. This way I come to the final picture, which is not giving the answer who is who, and rather posting the question even more about this archive. And I've used one of the picture I found in the archive as well. It's the fortress, as you have on your cover, Svitlana, of your book. So very shortly, that's all I can tell about this project. First time, it was 1996 when I found the negatives. First time I presented it in an art symposium at Podhirtsi Castle near Lviv, where I came with two of my Estonian friends. Was other artists from Austria, Serbia, was Francisco Infante from Moscow. So I've chosen the chapel of this palace, and I've made my installation in the chapel and all over the castle. Next and full presentation was in Kyiv, in a closer gallery, at the time when I was able to print the proper way all the pictures. So I knew from the beginning the pictures of the babies should be a really big format. At the end of the 90s, it was still a problem. So when I was able to do this, I presented in a closer gallery. They helped it with the production and so on. Next show was the same year, was in Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv in summer 2015. And 2 years later in Bialystok Photo Festival, it was opening exhibition for Bialystok Inter Photo Festival. Actually, I've met Maria Kapaeva there first time. She was still living in London at that time. So that's how it looks when printed properly. I mean, those pictures, this was Giclée prints, 120 centimeters high of those kids. So that was really working properly. And last year, in the autumn, October, it was in an ethnographic museum in Rzeszów in Poland as well. And finally, this year, this project is coming to Tallinn, I hope, this autumn. In my statement, I'm as well stating the answer rather to myself. Does really verbalizing or visualizing are needed for the very realization of existence beyond our own determination of a phenomenon or a process? So I was short, I was able. So in somehow I know that by using somebody else's materials, I'm telling story of myself. no doubt. So I'm telling my story, telling story of myself. In somehow is as well as self-curating project as well. So everything is quite complicated, I think. I was trying to be as simple as possible. Thank you. Ready for your questions.
Thanks a lot. Fascinating. Thanks a lot, Andrij. I enjoyed that a lot.
Thank you.
We should now perhaps start with William's questions. If you still remember them, hopefully. Svitlana, try to be short and maybe not too theoretical and methodological, because some of our listeners perhaps are not from academia. Yeah, make it quick and easy.
Well, the question about memory policies, I think, is very important and very interesting. How artists respond to these policies of memory, and if they follow the trends in their work, or they challenge these trends. As far as I understood this question, I think that it's very important question, because the policies of memory on the post-Soviet space, they might vary, but in a way, I think they're kind of government produced policies. They're in certain way structured and rigid, and the ways artists respond to the questions of memory, and they challenge the questions of history, the historical truths, the post-memory, how post-memory transforms actually the original. They're multiple, they're numerous, and they're very diverse. In this way, they expand the scope of possible applications of formation and interpretation of historical memory. And sometimes these projects, of course, are critical, because we can find these examples in Estonia with Christina Norman. We can find these examples in Ukraine with numerous works that work precisely with this idea of challenging the historical memory, and in a way challenging the public with its perception. And one of the examples in Ukraine is, of course, the issue of decommunization that was addressed by many Ukrainian artists and photographers, such as, for example, the photographer Evgeny Nikiforov, who documents the outcomes of this application of decommunization laws in a critical way. So this is something, and art per se, in principle, art in general throughout the centuries often works against the notion of censorship. And if you speak about policies of memory, of course, we can speak about censorship, and this is something that forms a point of collision. So I would like, yes, to answer this question, that certainly there are trends in which artists work with memory, but certainly in many cases they work against these trends, or they kind of create a diversity of possibilities that a viewer or a reader is able to select from. And in this case, art gives this kind of liberty of interpretation. And this is the main, in my opinion, is the main function of art, to give the liberty of different positions and different interpretations.
Okay, anybody else on William's questions?
Yeah, I could briefly answer the question William raised as well, because I think that the question was about the national politics of the 90s and late 80s, and the kind of productiveness to address and bring this to the fore. And for me, it's not so much about the question of addressing it. I think it's rather how do we address it in our work, and what kinds of meaningful and productive ways are there to do it. I guess in this kind of national politics, especially of the 80s, they also require new approaches, and we cannot use these Western established theories for analyzing these nation buildings. Because of how complex they are, and because of how history, how they are embedded in our histories, and as we increasingly see these histories which are unprocessed, they have a way of returning. And I would say that these ghosts from the 90s and late 80s, they also return, looking at the contemporary social political situations in the Baltics, definitely, but I think broader as well. Some curators and theorists are also connecting it to these waves of ecological consciousness. So in Estonia, but other Baltics as well, there was an increase of this ecological issues and fights against new power plants being established or plans around it, and yeah, I think this is another productive context. In my own work, I'm very interested in understanding this national politics in relation to minority communities, and I think it speaks broader also to the individual artistic positions and individual artists who come from different backgrounds, because there are many struggles involved, which are daily and ongoing. So it's not self-evident to have artists from minority backgrounds operating in these institutional scenes, which we are defined by. Thank you for bringing this out.
Thanks a lot, Margaret. We have a lot of interest here, and already 7 questions accumulated. I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them. The first one is also quite interesting for me, from Nadia Bernard Kovalchuk, who is asking, I would like to know more about the process of work on this book. How did the articles were gathered together? On which extent the process was collaborative? Was there any discussion between Svitlana and authors, or between authors themselves? How did the idea to put together Ukrainian and Baltic perspectives appear? But there's a lot of questions. Try to be as brief as possible, Svitlana. We have 6 more to answer.
Okay, so thank you, Nadia, for the question. Sorry, the question disappeared. I was having it open. Okay. Okay, I will. Sorry. Thank you, Nadia, for the question. Basically, the book was conceived as an idea to make a comparison across certain notions that could unite Ukraine and the Baltic countries as both former Soviet territories and as independent countries, and the ways how identity, the ways how memory manifested itself in these spaces, and all these questions that could be unitive, but they could be also divisive. And honestly, in my opinion, the culture of Ukraine and the Baltic countries has many similarities, and it has many kind of elements that can be shared and understandable to each other. And there used to be a quite big artistic exchange historically between the regions. So that's how the idea of uniting this together appeared. And as for the discussions about the book, I discussed with all the authors. the challenge was actually to find from Ukrainian side, to find authors who would write an article in English, and it was actually quite difficult, because unfortunately, I think the Ukrainian scholarship and history of art needs to be much more developed, because there is quite few people working in this sphere, and that was a challenge. And from Baltic side, I didn't experience such challenge really. And I discussed with all the authors individually which topics they would be interested in, and what is the main focus of their works, and what is the main kind of point of interest. And then we were finding in the discussion points of intersection. And that's how this body of text was produced. Of course, each text speaks about their own focus and their own interests, but in the total, they give precisely this complex perspective, as I hope. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let's go on so we get hopefully through all the questions. From an anonymous attendee, the Soviet Union was a strange mix of feminist rhetoric and misogyny. What has changed since its collapse in 1991? To what extent is feminist art shaping artistic discourse in Ukraine and the Baltic states, and what are the main concepts, styles, and trends? That is a question that would lead to an entire presentation or even conference. So, who feels competent to speak about that? Briefly.
Well, I just would like to mention that if Jessica Zychowicz would be presenting today, she could speak really much about Ukrainian feminist art. And from her text, I gathered that Ukrainian feminist art is the art that addresses wider range of topics than just the position of women in the society. It is not just about gender, it's also about some kind of political statements that can be done through gender identity. And in brief, I think this is an important element of Ukrainian art in the current situation, especially after the beginning of war with Russia, because women, they started getting more prominent role in Ukrainian society, precisely from this point of view of defense and their kind of relation to the army sometimes. And in this way, it also affects the visions that are presented by feminism in art.
Okay, the next question may be also to Andrij. Can you tell us about your current projects? Are there any plans in place to organize an exhibition of contemporary Ukrainian and Baltic art in London? Anything on that? Otherwise, we'll continue.
This is a question to...
Well, to everybody, I guess, but it could be also answered to Andrij. Andrij has actually talked about his plans a little bit, but as there was here a request for more, if you have any current projects that you want to very briefly speak about, and plans for exhibitions. We can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself, I guess.
What I'm planning in the upcoming year, I'm planning to be more back to Tallinn, because I did quite a lot in Ukraine recently and took my time, really took years to be present here. That's why I've showed those curatorial projects. I'm more present in Poland, which is a bit a paradox. It's in between, but I'm not fully in Ukraine, not fully in Estonia. So now I want to turn back to Estonia. So my last exhibitions there was at the end of the 90s at the Municipal Gallery and the National Library. That's all I had. And I'm supposed to show this project I was trying to show today. Sorry for this mess. It coming to Tallinn this autumn.
And the book will be presented at least twice again by Svitlana at Indiana University, right? And I forgot the other place where there will be.
And at the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. And also we are discussing now with Central European University. There might be another presentation in March.
Yeah, excellent. And maybe then you can also bring in other authors of the book, and perhaps then they can speak, for instance, about the feminism in more detail. But,
yes, sure.
That's obviously something that you have yourself thought about. So from KC comes the question: could you please comment on the dynamics in the development of visual culture in Ukraine in the last 8 years since the beginning of the war? Has it peaked yet? What are the latest trends? That's also a long research project, but perhaps somebody has a quick answer to that.
In my text, as I've described about this documentary approach that is developing and emerging in Ukraine, and precisely since 2014. And there are many artists who work with this documentary approach. Those artists who are descendants, who have descent from east of Ukraine, and they needed to move to flee the war. And in a way, they return and they reconsider in their projects precisely this conflict and their belonging to the territory and the people who keep living in those territories, that are borderline territories. And I think this is very interesting development of Ukrainian art in the latest 8 years. And from the other hand, I think that between the documentation, also there is a need of research, and that's precisely what is emerging already now. It's kind of further, there is already this comparative, not only comparative, but more like analytical perspective of what's going on. But it's logical processes, like first to gather the information and then already to analyze it. And with the accumulation of all these projects, it is more possible actually to elaborate other projects that would look maybe more critically, and not in very documentary, but critically at the ongoing situation. So I would say that the trends are documentary trends, archival trends, and the trends that work with kind of socially and politically charged material and information. I think I could sum up like that.
Okay. If nobody else wants to add anything, then I would read out the next question from Elizabeth Anders. How does post-colonial Ukrainian Baltic art fit in with the trends and artistic transformations in a wider European context? Also quite a big question. If somebody has a quick answer, and again, try to be maybe as applied as possible, as we have not only academics in the audience.
Maybe Margaret could speak brilliantly about this, because and to speak about the wider European context and your experience with working with it.
Well, I think that first of all, this whole notion of post-coloniality needs to be unpacked in this context, because it's not so obvious. We have history with 18 and 19 and from Middle Ages onwards, that is this colonially charged as far as Estonian and Latvian contexts are concerned. These are countries that have been under Baltic German and Swedish and Soviet Russian imperial rules. So I think this is research that is only starting, to conceptualize this ideas around post-coloniality and how to understand Baltic histories through these notions. I think definitely artworks are part of these developments, and these transnational links and collaborations are important in moving these discussions forward, because from a scholarly point of view, there's a need for material as well. So artists are doing very important contributions to these discussions. With my own curatorial work, also together with Ieva Astahovska, we have a project called Communicating Difficult Pasts, as a part of which we've organized one exhibition now in Latvian National Art Museum, and there's another exhibition coming in the Lithuanian National Gallery in April. And I want to mention this because these artists that we engage with the project are doing critical work on history and very research-based work. Our events and discussions so far have definitely shown that there are really important lineages and common themes that artists deal with, especially across Eastern Europe, but also connected to the developments in wider European context.
Okay, any other comments on this issue? Uilleam, Andrij, maybe? No? Okay, then I would read out the next question. Can you comment on the establishment of independent art institutions in Ukraine and in the Baltics in the last 30 years and their role in the creation of a new art scene? Were there any advantages in having a centralized cultural system which can help finance the official ethnic art, as, for example, was the case in the USSR? And this question comes from Boda. Anybody feels competent to answer to that? Please, Uilleam or Andrij, if you feel that you can say something on that.
I can rather tell something about previous question about contacts which we have. We're trying to do some project together. I didn't mention in my shortened presentation that I was connected to Tinisvind, well-known thinker and artist, and few other people from Lviv was very important. They have very important contacts back in the 80s at the time, and we're trying to do a project about this Ukrainian-Estonian contacts in the Soviet times yet. And I think it's very important because it's all gone to the shadow. And it was the closest friend of Tinisvind was from Lviv, and no one knows it. As well as in Lviv, no one knows about Alexander Aksinin, that his closest ally was in Tallinn. So, and many artists at that time was exchanging travels then and back, and now it's all gone. So, even in my experience, for now, it's two realities which didn't cross at all. So that's the phenomena, I think. So sorry, but it was for previous, rather for the previous question than for the last one.
I think it's also incredibly telling for how these national politics have driven the art institutions since the 90s onwards, so that we are just not aware, and some of the topics that surface are rather nationally driven. So
yes, absolutely, and are driven to the centers, to the west, first of all, not regionally, but. And now I can feel this is a turn, rather, at least in Tallinn, I can see it. It's turned more to peripheries, so-called, of course, peripheries, than to the centers. In Ukraine, it's still the center is in the focus, first of all, and comparing itself to the centers. So. Recently, it was I think at Livi Barrack, the most important exhibitions in Europe 2022. It's all in London, Berlin, and Paris. So where is Jonas Mekas in Vilnius? Where is Avantgarde, Museum of Avantgarde in Lodz in Poland? Where is the newest exhibition in Kumu? I mean, the exhibition of this landscapes of identities. We can't see it. We see Francis Bacon in London. So what's this all about? So I think that's very important point, to see each other. So.
Anybody wants to add something?
I want to comment on this last question. I find it very interesting, the question that were there any advantages in having a centralized cultural system in the USSR? I think that establishment of new art scene in Ukraine in the last 30 years was not as much related to the establishment of art institutions. Of course it was, but somehow also it was going kind of against of creation of these art institutions, not in opposing them directly, but let's say that precisely the centralized cultural system that was inherited from the Soviet Union, all this art unions of artists created in 1934, and imagine the system existed for 60 years. At the end, they were quite, let's say, impacting the cultural scene, and they're still to some extent impacting, because if we see the centralized policies of Ukraine, of Ministry of Culture, in the support of different initiatives, precisely these topics of support of ethnic art in their presentations, in the very centralized presentations, they all the time emerge. And the new art scene in Ukraine somehow survived and somehow developed on many occasions via private institutions, or it developed also individually by enthusiasm of individual artists, of sometimes individual art collectors. So there is, I think, not a single kind of vision of framework of institutional development in Ukraine, because there was much that was going on outside this institutional framework. I don't know if maybe my colleagues will agree with me on this occasion, because, for example, Andrij, what do you think about how was this establishment since 90s? Was there really kind of a place for institutions there?
You mean in Ukraine, comparing to Tallinn, or
in Ukraine?
And
if you can compare to Tallinn,
I still can't see those. It was in somehow the center of contemporary art in Kyiv, which still was Soros center, or how to call it. And Open Estonia, it was quite similar in the 90s, but after it goes different ways. You know it better than me. Almost no institutions really working in Ukraine. So that's pitifully, that's the truth. It's difficult to compare even. I don't know what to compare. What exactly I have to compare? What's institutions? So.
If I could maybe just add one word, I think that what we've seen in the last few years, especially since the Maidan revolution, is that there has been a change in the institutional landscape in Ukraine in relation to arts and culture, funding and organizations, and it really has improved. You know, before that we had many years of basically, like Andrij said, institutions not functioning, being underfunded, and very often also affected by corruption. And that has, I think, there was a big effort to change that. And you know, state funding has been coming in, and they've been reaching out also. The Ukrainian Institute that was set up in Ukraine, Ukrainian Book Institute is one that I've been very interested in. You know, things like the Kyiv Mistecki Arsenal and these kind of things, which are, I think the landscape has changed a lot, and it's become more, much more professional and much more kind of transparent. I think it's still a process that has its challenges, and we saw that, you know, after Zelensky government came in, we saw the process faltering a little bit maybe. But I think there are reasons to be. I'm not a specialist specifically in the artistic institutions and organizations, but I think more broadly, there are some reasons to be optimistic.
No doubt, that's true. No doubt, especially in Lviv, new smaller institute like municipal center, they are rising. New art center is coming, but it's rather private initiative. A gem factory is coming next year. So of course there is an initiative which are developing right now, but it's really difficult to compare.
Okay. If nobody else wants to comment on that, I would maybe read out the last two questions so we can then come to the end. From Anatoly Babichuk, I'm curious, how were the artists chosen? And from Elizabeth Anders, has there been any comparative research effort to contrast and compare Ukrainian and Baltic art with the artistic transformations in East Central Europe, the former Eastern Bloc, and West European countries? So the first one about the artists chosen and how they were chosen, and the second question about comparative research with other East and West European countries. Svitlana, I guess.
As for the question on comparative research, yes, there have been several books and important books. One of them is called Networking the Bloc by Clara Campwelsh, and actually it speaks about artistic exchanges in the Eastern Bloc in the times of the Soviet Union. But it doesn't reach to the contemporaneity. Another book was by Andrij Shersky about East Central European art, and is quite an extended research about different topics that can be shared by artists of a variety of countries of East Central Europe, from their attitude to socialism to different identity issues and so on. And it's also quite an interesting research, which is not kind of exactly necessarily takes a comparative scope. It is a research of a variety of case studies. In my opinion, yes, that's.
Anybody else on this? As I'm totally incompetent on these issues, I'm sort of I'm just reading out the questions. I'm not adding anything myself. There was a question about how the artists were chosen.
The artists were chosen by every author who considered it relevant for the argument that they were following, particular examples of art and artistic practices. And, that was individual selection, and of course informed research selection by every author of the who contributed to the book.
Svitlana, yes. Correct me if I'm not right. You choose me before you knew my connection to Estonia at all, right? You wasn't. You didn't know I'm connected to Tallinn when you choose.
I saw precisely your project. I saw information about your project of Site Specific.
Then you after you yes, and then it just happened that it's connected to Estonia, and I'm Estonian citizen, I must say.
Yeah, that was an interesting coincidence, actually. Yes.
Yeah, that's a coincidence. Yes.
Yes, Margaret.
I had a question to Andrij as well, related to the presentation and this work, this very intriguing and very interesting work that you showed and shared with us. I wonder what your efforts have been towards finding out more about the identity of the person or this family who is represented in these photographs.
Yeah, my idea about this project, one of the main points that exhibition is coming to Tallinn. I want to give all the stuff to Lina Museum, to the city museum. They will know for sure and easy by the archives, because it's number 4 or 6 on Kentman Street. It will be easy to recognize the people. So it was out of my reach to go to the archive or something like that. So that's the idea. Together with exhibition, I will give it to Lina Museum. All the box. It's not a box anymore. Actually, it's lost with part of my archive in Tallinn. I have no box, but still keep those. I don't want to keep them. I will give them to the city, to the place which is belong, in fact. But I think it will be really interesting, both historically and as a photography itself, and by historically. I think they were living somewhere in Viljandi. I can recognize some parts of Tartu on it, and those travels, and I think it's very interesting.
I really look forward to your exhibition in Tallinn.
Yes, I hope we'll meet. I'm coming next month just for details about the exhibition, and then in end of September. It's not announced officially, so I'm not telling the place exactly, but it should be.
Okay, on this positive, optimistic vision, I would suggest to finish for today. That was an exciting session. I've learned a lot from this. Again, I can only say how happy I am that this book ended up in the Ukrainian Voices book series. I'm also relying here on the review that Uilleam presented us. So this has once more confirmed my happiness about this project. Also, Svitlana, many thanks for engaging yourself in all these presentations. I want to thank above all, in conclusion, British-Ukrainian Aid for arranging this and for bringing us together here and making this possible. Many thanks, Margaret. Many thanks, Andrij. Many thanks, Uilleam. And Svitlana, many thanks for making this happen. Unless Natalia.
Yes, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for such a stimulating discussion. Each and everyone, thank you for your contributions, and also to our brilliant audience for their curiosity and excellent questions. And I just published, there are 2 more events based on the Ukrainian Voices book series coming up in February and March. You can see the details in the chat. I'm reminding you about the donations. Please donate. You have the details either via Just Giving or visit our website. I wish everyone a nice evening. Thank you very much for staying with us for so long. And I apologize for technical issues and starting a little bit late, but I'm sure it was worth it. Thank you. Stay safe and stand with Ukraine. Goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.